Now, an education expert says students who pursue their studies in a language that is not their first language face numerous challenges. General Manager at the Independent Institute of Education, that's Peter Kriel, says institutions and educators must play a vital role in creating inclusive environments that support students in overcoming language barriers. The Institute's Dr. Andre Abrahams joins us now for more on this. Dr. Abrahams, a pleasure to have you on the program this afternoon. So as the Deputy Dean of Academic Development and Support, you have a unique perspective on the challenges that students face when studying in English as opposed to their mother tongue. Can you elaborate on some of these challenges and also the impact on students' academic experiences?
Very nice to have you to be here in Ntantla, and afternoon to your viewers as well. I think you've hit the nail on the head. There's a number of challenges that come with mother tongue education in higher education. I think one of the problems we have, number one, is recognition. It's very difficult for students to, number one, make meaning when language is a challenge. It's very difficult to draw inferences. How do I draw conclusions when I'm struggling to understand this concept as a whole? How do I communicate my ideas? And all of these things end up affecting how students, how confident they are within that space. If I'm not confident in understanding particular concepts, it makes it really hard for me to express ideas, to build arguments. And, the challenge for us in higher education is, what does this mean? How do we create an environment where these students can prosper, knowing that they come into our spaces with these challenges?
So in your opinion, what are the benefits and drawbacks of studying in English, particularly for students whose first language is not English? How can universities then mitigate the challenges while also leveraging the advantages of English language education?
Really good question, Ntantla. Look, I think we have to understand that the economic power of English is there. We also know that there's a lot of opportunities that come both at a local level and at an international level. It's still the operative language when it comes to business, when it comes to science, when it comes to academics. And because of that, even students and parents where English is not the mother language, there is still an attraction to these institutions. One of the other benefits we know within that space, with English being so dominant within higher education, is that we know that the resources exist, the literature is there. And probably what's most important in the South African context is jobs and the job market and what that means for South Africans. Students and parents are not willing to take risks in the space of, what does articulation look like? What is my career success going to look like? And because of that, they're willing to take on all the challenges which comes with being, where the medium is English and it's not the first language, it's not my mother language. They're willing to take that challenge no matter what.
Dr. Abrahams, another aspect that's often highlighted is the importance of universities in creating inclusive environments that also support students in overcoming language barriers. What specific strategies or even initiatives have you implemented or even observed that effectively address these challenges?
Look, it's a contested space. For some, this is the solution to the educational problems that we have in the country. To some, it's never going to work because there's a concern around feasibility. I think what we've got to do is we've all got to be part of the solution. Government, private, public, all of us. At a higher education level, we've got to do a lot more in terms of supporting those in basic education, helping students try to demystify the codes and the words that are sitting on a piece of paper. And I think that's the first start. I think we also need to do a lot better to understand the language gaps that these students have. So coming into the higher education space, where are they? And so that we can then develop personalized learning paths for these students. And I think that's important. There's also an opportunity for us to leverage technology. And again, we have the very beginning of this, but there will be possibilities for us. But I do think one of the biggest things that we have to adapt as a country as a whole, especially in the tertiary space, is a focus on the pedagogical experiences of students. How do we help them make meaning? How do we help them make connections to what they already know? How do we make learning something that stimulates and interests the students, regardless of the language being used? And I think if we address those challenges, we'll be on the right path.
I would assume that cultural and identity considerations also play a significant role in language choice for students. How can universities then balance the need for English proficiency with a preservation of students' cultural identity and also, importantly, a sense of belonging?
really important. If I'm going to make it work at a tertiary level where the expectation on my cognitive ability far exceeds something I would have experienced in high school, I need to be part of an inclusive environment. I need to know that regardless of the medium used in my classroom, there are resources and ways that I can be supported within that tertiary space. And I know, it already has taken place sporadically in the country. The use of glossaries, the use of peer-to-peer assistance is there, but we have to be a little bit more deliberate in understanding that. It's a really difficult thing to do at a national level. Universities have been grappling with this question for years. So when we say mother tongue, what mother tongue are we talking about? When we say be inclusive, to what extent do we be inclusive and at the same stage still market us to an international audience, ensure that our skills are not localized and that we are a global product and our graduates are able to go out into the world and find work, and at the same time give the students the confidence to prosper in a very challenging environment.
Again, I go back to this point. The adjustment period for students who are transitioning to an English-speaking educational environment can be quite daunting. I'm sure you'd agree with this. What resources or even support systems do you believe are essential for helping students navigate this transition successfully?
Yeah, a really big jump. We've always been struggling with the bridge from high school into the tertiary space, and it's going to be a continuous challenge. If we try to solve that problem at a tertiary level, it will be too late. We, as those who work in the tertiary space, we've got to get in there a lot sooner. We've got to find ways to support the basic education space. Because if you're struggling with the cognitive ability, if you're struggling with comprehension, those type of struggles just become worse in the tertiary space. It doesn't get easier. So if we can support the basic education space in thinking about the best ways of addressing these skills when it comes to teaching and learning, how do we simplify very complicated concepts that students are going to be confronted with at an early stage? How do we give them the skills to connect very important concepts to things that they know when we know that language is a barrier? So I do think getting in early is really, really important. And then ensuring that we don't, I always say to my students, hope is not a plan. If we simply hope that these students are going to adapt to the tertiary environment, that's never going to happen. We're going to have to be deliberate in terms of the support that we give them. It has to be continuous, and it's going to take a lot of adaptation from what's happening inside the classroom, and then how do our students use the literature that's available to them.
But Dr. Abrahams, South Africa boasts a rich linguistic diversity, yet English remains the dominant language in higher education. Do you see any trends or even shifts in attitude towards mother tongue instruction at the university level? And how do you envision the future of language diversity in higher education?
Yes, look, the trends, unfortunately, one of the trends within the tertiary space is that change when it comes to mother tongue education has been slow. Dr. Naledi Pandor, Dr. Bladen Zamande since 2011 has been calling for this multilingual space in the tertiary space, has been calling for us to review our language policies. And unfortunately, since 1994, in the tertiary space, we have been a bit apathetic to this change. And there are reasons for that. We've got to improve our capacity within that space. We've got to review the importance that we've placed on teaching and learning in the tertiary space, sometimes overcrowded by an emphasis on research. And I think those are some of the things we'll have to address to try and change that space. I think there's an appetite for it, but there has been a concern around the feasibility of it. Do we have the staff? Do we have the literature and the material that can support the instruction within that space? And maybe more controversially, do our lecturers have the skills to address those gaps when we know that students have been struggling coming into our system? Do we know how to change and to support them within the tertiary space?
Let's expand on that point. Building linguistic competence and inclusivity, like you say, requires this collaborative effort from various stakeholders within the university community. How do you then engage faculty, staff, and students in really fostering a supportive environment for language learners?
Well, I think communication's important. One of the suggestions I gave earlier was peer-to-peer assistance. What we do have to do is get better to understand how do students actually learn. And if we can get to understand how students actually navigate that learning space, how does their brain work? I think we'll take a few steps forward from where we are in terms of addressing these issues. I'll give you an example. If I ask you to think back to one of your best memories as a kid, you can name what happened on that day, who you were playing with, the smell, the sights, the sounds of that day. And you can recall that without even thinking about where are my crib notes, where's the album, because that feeling was connected to a particular moment in time. It created meaning for you. So if we were able to bring the lecturer and the student closer in terms of what motivates the student, what makes meaning for the student, what examples are going to translate to the nature of where that student is in time, then we'll be able to see a shift from where a lot of our students are at the moment in terms of the working memory to that long-term, deep understanding of the concepts that we're in. If our lecturers are not going to fully understand how the brains of students work, what that environment needs to look like in my classroom, how do I take myself away from being the center of the classroom and putting the student's learning experience every time we encounter one of these concepts. If we don't address those things, it doesn't matter what textbooks we are using or whether we're on this decolonial journey.
Right.
What's important for us if we understand that learning environment.
But with the increasing globalization of higher education proficiency in English, proficiency in English is often viewed as a valuable asset in the global job market. How can universities then balance the demand for English proficiency with this need to accommodate students from diverse linguistic backgrounds?
Look, I don't think we're at the stage where we can get rid of English as the medium of instruction or the dominant medium of instruction. When we look at the academy, when we look at research, when we look where we are as in terms of instruction, and if we look at the economic power and the hegemony of English at this stage, I don't think the solution is taking English away. I think the solution for us is a pedagogical one. I think the solution for us is mother language learning. In other words, how do I explain to the student using examples, explaining concepts to them, maybe using a glossary, using technology, using the experience of their peers who may have grasped the concept a lot further. So I think if we focus on mother language learning rather than the replacement of English as a dominant language, I think we'll take a few steps ahead of trying to meet that global demand. And if you looked at LinkedIn and the examples of jobs, we know that English is really dominant as a proficient skill wanted. What we have to look at is that this drive for English doesn't replace the understanding that students need when they go into these industries.
And as we wrap up, but also looking ahead, what steps do you believe universities should prioritize to really ensure that students, regardless of their linguistic background, have equal access to educational opportunities and support services, quite importantly?
Yeah, I think support services is really, really important. We have to understand where students are when they come into our classrooms. We have to understand that regardless of whether they've qualified to be in that BA degree, do they have the capacity to understand the things that are going to be put in front of them? Yeah. So I do think we need to give them particular skills, understand how to read with understanding, how to grapple with important concepts. How do I move away from having fluency in a particular language and rather focus on understanding in a particular language? How do I move from recognizing particular words to understanding what those words mean in various contexts? And the only way that we're going to address that is within the classroom. Can we be more transformative? Can we be more constructive in what we do? Can we highlight and put emphasis on what's happening in the classroom so that students are able to succeed and have the graduates' attributes necessary in the South African context?